My name is Aaron Brickman, and I lead RMI's economic development team in the United States. As many of you know, I came to RMI in 2022 after long stints at the Global Business Alliance and before that, the U.S. Department of Commerce, where I created and led Select USA and its predecessor. So, a career working with economic developers, corporations, and related advisors and ecosystems, perfect for my role here at RMI. And if you're new to RMI is an independent, market-oriented, nonpartisan, nonprofit consultancy focused on energy systems transformation. We've been operating for over 40 years. RMI was founded in 1982 in Colorado, and we're active in over 50 countries. So today's webinar is made possible by the New Energy Industrial Strategy Center, a global network of researchers, policymakers, and private sector stakeholders advancing new energy industrial strategies. Today's webinar and the research that will be presented as part of it is part of a broader work stream around industrial strategy and regional economic development in the United States. Before I share a bit more about RMI's economic development team and introduce today's presenters, some quick housekeeping. This session is being recorded, and the recording, along with resources, will be posted on our event page within 24 hours. If you have questions at any point, please drop them into the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. RMI's economic development team partners with state and regional leaders across the United States on the attraction and retention of investment in new energy technology. We work with counties, cities, and metros, states, multi-state coalitions, and more to get this work done. We also work at the national level on identifying competitive opportunities in manufacturing and supply chains. For some regions, we facilitate early conversations around sizing the economic opportunity in new energy technology. For others, we focus on seizing an opportunity that is already apparent. In addition to our team's place-based partnerships, we host no-cost virtual sessions and low-cost in-person workshops. The next workshop, shameless plug alert, is our New Energy Economic Development Bootcamp in Boulder, Colorado on Thursday, July 30th. If you're on this webinar, you're exactly the type of person who would enjoy our bootcamp. So join us. Of course, if you're here on this webinar, you'd also like to hear about incentives. Over the past several years, the United States has captured hundreds of billions of dollars of announced private sector investment in new energy tech supply chains, manufacturing, and deployment. If you're an economic development professional, you already know that these announcements do not magically appear. They are the result of months and sometimes years of planning and partnership, and yes, negotiation. This negotiation and coordination ranges from the coordination of permits to the development of incentive packages that involve tax breaks or workforce development support or other project attraction tools or all of the above. In the case of many new energy projects, state and local leaders are considering how they can complement federal incentives that boost the business case for investment in the U.S. writ large. All of this matters because state and local leaders want to win projects that other places could capture because early experience and investment quickly translate into lasting regional advantage. But public resources are precious, and projects sometimes stall in any sector. So I'm delighted to host this crucial conversation and to introduce today's two presenters. Today's first presenter is Dr. Tim Bartik, who serves as Senior Economist at the Upjohn Institute for Employment Research. Tim is a seminal expert in place-based economic development and developed the Bartik cost-benefit model that simulates incentives, benefits, and costs for local residents' incomes. Tim will present the Upjohn Institute's evaluation of development incentives for 50 large-scale clean energy projects. Following Tim's presentation, we'll hear from Thomas Maynard, Executive Vice President at the Greater Phoenix Economic Council, or GPEC. Thomas will share the story of one of the larger battery manufacturing projects in the country, the LG Energy Solution Plant in Queen Creek, Arizona. He'll speak to the role of the LG project in the region's economic strategy and what state and local leaders across the country can learn from GPEC's engagement with advanced manufacturers. So without further ado, I'll pass things to Tim. Over to you.
Well, thanks a lot, Aaron, and thank you to all the attendees at the webinar. So I'm going to speak for about 25 minutes. I'm going to try to summarize the key points from a 146-page report. If you want to read the whole report or read executive summary of it, the Upjohn Institute website has information on this today. You should be able to easily find that at upjohn.org. But let me just get into it because I have a lot to cover and only 25 minutes. So, whoops. Okay. Bottom line on this, as was mentioned, we look at 50 of the largest clean energy projects, and the bottom line is that the glass is at least 2/3 full. Over 2/3 of these 50 projects, we estimate, have benefits greater for state residents that exceed the incentive cost. And the main point I'm going to make in this webinar is that you can reform how you conduct incentive policy to improve net benefits considerably beyond what we're currently doing. Better targeting, better design, and also by what you do in housing policy. And just to briefly mention at the outset what I mean by that, by better targeting, I mean targeting more distressed places, targeting more projects with higher jobs multipliers. By better design, I mean avoiding going overboard on incentives in terms of having too high incentives per job. I also mean that although I think tax incentives remain important, that ideally you would place a little more emphasis on customized services to companies that are another type of incentive, and how you enforce clawbacks is really crucial. And finally, making sure that you have the housing policies that fit in with your economic development policy is crucial. So the remainder of the webinar is basically me summarizing, giving more details on what I mean by all this. So methodology. We had a list of the 100 largest recent clean energy investments in the US, and we selected 50 of those projects based solely on one criterion. Could we get good information on incentives? So what I want to emphasize here is we were not cherry picking 50 projects that would look good or look bad or anything else. We just were picking projects on which we could get good information. There's a lot of these projects. They're in 22 different states, about half in the South, half outside the South. Variety of industries. A majority of the projects are in electric vehicles or batteries, but there are another 20 that are in wind, solar, alternative fuels type things. These are big projects. Collectively, there's a total of about 96,000 direct jobs promised, and the incentives are close to 29 billion. So it's pretty hefty incentives per job. They average over 300,000. Now, I should say what I mean by incentives. I'm using the term a little bit more broadly than sometimes it's used. So I'm including tax incentives, things like property tax abatements, jobs tax credits, investment tax credits. I'm also including cash grants, deal closing funds, but we're also including various types of like what I'll call customized services. So I mean things like customized job training, where we community colleges work with firms to provide help screen and train workers suited to the firm's skill needs. I mean things like access roads or utilities, other land development things where we work with the firm to make sure that the site really has the appropriate accompanying infrastructure. So I include those as incentives as well in this model. The benefits is evaluated by a regional econometric model that I've created that's been used before on other projects in a variety of different states. And the benefits we're looking at are principally effects via job creation on state residents' income per capita. So the main component of this ends up being increases in earnings per capita due to creating jobs. But we're also including fiscal benefits, cases where the revenue to state and local government exceeds the extra public service cost. And we're also including capital gains due to property values going up. Now, some things we're not including in the model is certain type environmental benefits and costs. So, the impact of these projects on global warming is not part of the model. We're not looking at effects of these projects on electricity costs or other energy costs. But we are looking at something that's very important to people. Do these projects help people get good jobs? Do these projects pay off with fiscal benefits for state and local governments? Those are very important, but I want to emphasize we're not including everything. And the benefits and costs we focus on in the project are the benefits and costs in dollar terms that occur over 20 years, and we take the present value of that over 20 years for state residents. Why 20 years? Well, 20 years includes most of the incentives. It also captures most of the benefits. The model actually goes out to 80 years, but you start going into what's happening in 50 or 70 years from now, and you're getting pretty speculative as to what's going on. So we didn't want to include that. Also, the study, we did most of the evaluation of projects in late 2025, like November, around then 2025. These projects are changing all the time. Some projects are downsized, some are canceled, some are expand. And it's a moving target. So you should realize that there have been some changes since we actually summarized the projects. Okay. Again, summarizing results. 70%, 35 out of 50 projects had benefits in terms of higher income per capita for state residents that are more than what the incentives cost. So they made sense from the point of view of state residents. The median project had a benefit cost ratio that implies that the income increases for state residents are 47% greater than the incentive costs. So again, it's better, but there's a very wide variance. 13 of the projects, the benefit cost ratio was greater than 3-to-1. On the other hand, 7 projects had a benefit cost ratio less than 0.5. That is, the benefits in terms of higher income per capita was less than half of the incentive cost. So there's quite a wide variance. So one of the things I'm going to ask is what causes that variance and how can we move the needle so these projects pay off more? Here's a map that shows where the projects are. As I said, they're in 22 states around the country. And then the map breaks it down a little bit. The dark blue are the projects that had benefits greater than cost. The kind of blue, green, teal, and the yellow show projects where incentive cost or more than benefits. So the project didn't pay off. And the size of the circle is the size of the incentives provided. So you can kind of get a picture of how things are distributed across the map. As I said, there's a wide variance. The top 5 projects had benefit cost ratios of greater than 4-to-1, and as in some cases as great as 6-to-1. And the bottom 5 projects, in some cases, actually had negative benefit cost ratio. Now, you might ask, how on earth could a project have a negative benefit cost ratio? Surely some jobs were created. Well, in some cases, the incentives per job are so large, in some cases, because the project was downsized, that paying for the incentive cost actually destroyed jobs on net. So on net, the project actually was a job loser. So you obviously don't want that. In that case, you get negative benefit cost ratios. Some industry patterns. As I said, majority of the projects were electric vehicle or battery projects. And those projects, a typical project had a benefit cost ratio of 2.34, meaning that the income per capita gain for state residents was 134% greater than incentive cost. On the other hand, on average, although there are differences, I'm not saying every project is like this, but the typical other clean energy project benefit cost ratio was 0.83, meaning benefits were 17% greater than benefits were 17% less than incentive cost. And the big reason for this, and I'll elaborate on this more later, why this is that a lot of the alternative fuels projects tended to create relatively few direct jobs, and yet they involved a lot of capital investment. They tended to have sometimes they had hefty property tax abatements or investment tax credits as a result. And when you look at the bottom line, it's very hard for the job creation benefits to be greater than these incentive costs. And that's what seems to be going on with some of these projects. There's also, and I'll elaborate that a little bit later, what to do about that. We also found slight regional differences Projects in the South tended to have somewhat higher benefit cost ratios than projects elsewhere in the country. When we looked into that, it's mostly due to two factors. One, the projects in the South tended to be in areas that had a lower employment rate, a lower employment to population ratio, somewhat more distressed. I'll elaborate on that more later. And they also tend to be in areas that had lower housing price effects, and both of those tend to drive up benefits. And I'll explain in a minute why that is. Okay, so let's talk about how we can improve things, because I want to be, the report very much strives to be solutions oriented. What do we do about this? So we're not just evaluating these projects, we're asking, going forward, how can policymakers improve on things? Well, one is through better targeting. As I already mentioned, targeting more distressed areas helps. So specifically, if the prime age employment rate, what's that? That's economics jargon. The prime age employment rate is the employment to population ratio for persons ages 25 to 54. That is people who generally we kind of expect to work. And if that rate's lower by 5 percentage points, and what does that mean? Well, in the US right now, if you look at the average area, its prime age employment rate might be 80, 81%. On the other hand, 10% of the population lives in areas that might be 5 percentage points lower than that. So you're essentially saying that if the project is located in a typical distressed area compared to an average area, if that's the case, a project in a distressed area will have a benefit cost ratio that increases by 50%. Why is that? Well, if you think about it, projects, if you increase employment in a local economy, it has to either increase the employment to population ratio, the employment rate, or increase the population. There's no other alternative. And when companies are hiring an area that has more unemployed and underemployed people available, that is, the prime age employment rate is lower, that leads to more hiring of the local unemployed and less hiring of in-migrants. When you hire the local unemployed more, that drives up the employment rate. That directly drives up earnings per capita of local residents. And it also puts more upward pressure on real wage rates. So both of those raise the earnings per capita effects of job creation. It also lowers in-migration. And the problem with in-migration from a state and local government perspective is that when you bring more students and more people in, it costs you money. You have to hire teachers to keep class size ratios constant. You have to hire police and fire to keep response times the same. You have to do more with infrastructure. So there are less fiscal benefits and there's more in-migration. Now, one thing I want to emphasize is, so one way to get more jobs to go to the non-employed is to target distressed places with your incentives. That is, pick more projects that are in distressed places or try to see if you can nudge companies into locating in those areas. But there also are things you can do if you accompany your economic development policies with very robust workforce development policies at the local level. And so if you have robust workforce development policies, you maybe can encourage companies to change who they hire. That if you can do a better job placing and training the local unemployed and underemployed in jobs, you can increase the job creation benefits, the benefits of job creation for your local population. So it's not exclusively by targeting distressed places. You also can do more in workforce development. The other type of targeting is targeting projects with higher jobs multipliers. Jobs multiplier, maybe most people on this webinar already understand multipliers, but if the job multiplier is 1/3 greater, 4 rather than 3, what do you mean by a multiplier of 3 versus 4? Well, a multiplier of 3 means that for every direct job, there are 2 other jobs created, either in local suppliers or in local retailers when the workers go out and buy things, or in other local companies who are attracted to some cluster of companies. And a multiplier of 4 means rather than one for each one direct job, there are 3 other jobs. So if you can increase the multiplier, the benefit cost ratio increases by more than a third. Why? Because you're getting, for every direct job, you're getting more total job creation. Now, one way to do that is, given your incentives budget, choose more project with high multipliers. Another way to do it, and this relates back to some of the things Aaron said at the outset, if you have an industrial strategy that is trying to build clusters of related industries with strong supplier links, conceivably that can increase the multiplier over what it otherwise would be. So you can target projects, or you can try to actually affect the multiplier by an industrial strategy. Incentive design. As I said, a lot of these incentives are hefty, and hefty incentives are okay unless you go overboard. So out of the 50 projects, the 12 projects that had the highest ratio of incentives to cost all are net losers. They have all benefits less than cost. And the reason is that, yes, providing higher incentives does encourage more firms to choose your state, but doubling incentives does not necessarily double the odds that the company will choose your state. It has a somewhat lesser effect. There are some diminishing returns to incentives, and so you don't want to go overboard. The second point is that although cash incentives, tax incentives, and cash grants are a part of what states do in economic development and will probably continue to do, the research evidence is that the bang for the buck of providing customized services like customized job training or access roads, they're probably about 50% more cost effective. And why is that? Although firms definitely like cash, when you provide workers they need and you provide land they need with the right permits and right infrastructure, you're providing stuff that firms have difficulty providing completely on their own. And so they have a somewhat higher bang for the buck. And finally, as was mentioned at the outset, sometimes projects are downsized or canceled. And one issue is, do you have written into your incentive agreements clawbacks that, in fact, you are able to enforce and are willing to enforce? And I mean clawbacks that when the project is downsized, not only do you cancel or reduce future incentives, but you also recover as much as possible of past incentives. And we did some analysis in the report, and in many cases, providing more enforcing clawbacks really makes a big difference. The final thing I want to mention is housing policy. So, there's a lot of variation across the U.S. in how housing prices respond to population growth. So if you go to places like San Francisco or LA or some East Coast cities, you might get that 1% population growth raises housing prices by 1.3%. On the other hand, some southern cities, you might get that 1% population growth raises housing prices only by 0.3%. What we find in examining these projects is that when the housing price response is lower by 0.5%, which is about half the difference between San Francisco and some southern cities, the benefit cost ratio increases by over 40%. Now, that's not necessarily intuitively obvious. I mean, you might say, well, gee, when you have growth, if housing prices go up more, that creates these huge capital gains for property owners. Isn't that a benefit? Isn't that something you're worried about in this report? Well, yeah, we do count that as a benefit in this report. But what we find is that when you actually look at it, the higher that benefit for property owners is totally offset, more than totally offset, by the fact that higher housing prices and higher overall local prices reduce the real incomes of some local residents whose incomes are not tied to the local economy. For example, anyone who's a retiree who's living on retirement income. And more importantly, when housing prices go up, this is part of something that will push up nominal wages, push up overall local costs in the economy. It will tend to destroy some other jobs, discourage some other job growth, and you're actually reducing the net multiplier. I mean, one of the key point here is that if you're pursuing an economic development policy that is premised on the notion that you think job growth is good for your economy, it's somewhat contradictory for you to then turn around and say, but we don't want to build any housing to accommodate the increased population. You got to decide, do you actually want growth or not? And if you don't want growth, that's one thing. But if you do want growth, it's somewhat strange to have a housing policy that contradicts that. Okay, just to summarize, as I said, glass is 2/3 full. 70% of these projects have benefits more than cost. And the reason is that job creation is very, very valuable in the US, particularly in distressed places where people really need jobs and where the jobs go to the non-employed. When you get people into jobs, it raises their human capital, raises their job skills. They're more employable long-term. They have higher earnings per capita 15, 20 years later. There's a lot of studies showing that. And of course, there are big spillover benefits. It reduces the social cost of substance abuse, reduces property crime, reduces family breakups. On the other hand, although that means that even costly incentives per job can pay off, not if you go overboard. If the incentives are way out of line with the jobs you're incenting, that doesn't work because paying for incentives also destroys jobs. There are two sides to things. Incentives encourage job growth, but they also destroy job growth by the fact you have to pay for them. And finally, if you want to reform things and improve things, if you want to be solutions oriented, if we better target and design these incentives, so we're targeting higher multiplier projects in more distressed places or in some other way, making sure that a high proportion of the jobs go to the non-employed, that will improve things. If we make sure we have good clawbacks, that will improve things. And if we have housing policies that are consistent with what we're doing on job growth, that will improve things. So let me stop there. I look forward to your questions, and I'll turn things over to Thomas Maynard to talk about the Arizona perspective on things.
Thank you so much, Tim. Over to you, Thomas.
Yeah, thank you. Looking forward to the conversation and yeah, appreciate the opportunity to be here. Yeah, my name is Thomas Maynard. I'm with GPEC, which is the Greater Phoenix Economic Council. We're the regional economic development entity for metropolitan Phoenix. We've been around for the last 36 years, and I'll kind of jump into kind of what we're seeing at I guess more of a localized view. From these projects, these mega projects, and specifically from an incentive standpoint, kind of how Arizona looks at things. So I'm actually going to start with a map to showcase a few, and we highlighted here on this map some mega projects, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about LG Energy Solutions. So that's number 3 here on the map. If you're not familiar with Arizona or specifically the Greater Phoenix region, we're a market of about 5 million people. It's the 10th largest metropolitan area in the United States. We included some other logos on here on purpose to kind of showcase we have a lot of other mega projects that have received not only large incentive benefits, but also has a great community impact that we can see, which I can certainly touch on. So if you're not familiar with these logos, there's very much heavy in the semiconductor space. So TSMC, Taiwanese Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, Intel has been in our market since the late 70s. And then actually Amcor, they're headquartered here, but they're building a new manufacturing facility. All 3 of those are in the semiconductor space. What's not on this list, but what we do have in our market, and it's if I'd have to zoom out the map a little bit, is Lucid Motors. So from an automotive EV manufacturing space, the slides earlier kind of show that's still heavily concentrated in the South and the Southeast part of the United States in particular, but we are starting to see a little bit more of that activity here out west. I always like showing this map here to kind of speak to, okay, we're going to talk a lot about that kind of cost benefit analysis. But this will show all of the companies that we've helped work with over the last 5 fiscal years. And really the highlight here is the dots on the map will kind of showcase the opportunity of once you attract the quote unquote big ones, there is a very large opportunity for the supply chain to help or to support these larger projects. So not every single dot here is a company in the semiconductor supply chain, although we are seeing a lot of that. And we're starting to see some more battery supply chain companies move into the market as well. And again, we can kind of discuss this a little bit further in Q&A, but we are definitely seeing that added benefit of the supply chain to support these large manufacturers either locate to our market or in their kind of site selection process as we speak now. All right, so jumping into the incentives, and the slide says this is the support for LG Energy Solutions specifically, but this is safe to say would be an offer for any type of manufacturing company or anyone that's bringing a large economic impact into our state. So Arizona, like most states in the United States, does have a state level economic development agency that's called the Arizona Commerce Authority. So they manage our state level programs. Those fall into two buckets, either statutory incentives, which I'll touch on here in a bit, or discretionary. Discretionary is exactly what it sounds like. It's kind of similar to your deal closing fund, up to the discretion of the ACA. I would say the majority, though, of our incentive programs are these statutory programs, meaning you already know where the rules are. You have to, hit X amount of economic impact to receive a specific benefit. We do have programs specifically designed either for manufacturers or headquartered projects. And I think that kind of speaks to that job multipliers, that we talked about in the previous slides of trying to help induce, those projects and those employers that we know will have a net benefit to our community. At the local level, most of the local incentives are in the form of either like workforce development or workforce training, and then public infrastructure reimbursements. So we have a gift clause in our Arizona State Constitution that precludes cities from providing a gift that is greater than the public benefit that they would receive. So other states at the local level have more flexibility and freedom to really participate on the incentives on the local level, which Arizona does not. We also have we are the only state in the union that doesn't have a TIF, tax increment financing, which is another attractive tool, especially on the development side, to help induce these projects and get them into across the finish line. But the locals can play in that, and that's where that public infrastructure is very important. So as an example for LG specifically, the site that they selected was actually owned by the state of Arizona. I had to go through a public auction process for LG Energy Solutions to control the site. But around that, there was no access to. There was a few roads that were there, but obviously roads had to be improved. A highway had to be built on the site itself. Utilities had to be delivered to the site. Water, power, natural gas. So all of that. All of those projects that again had a public benefit, those public infrastructure. That's where the city can be more creative at the local level to kind of induce. We have a policy in place that you can leverage the construction sales tax that is generated by this project and use those funds to help offset some of those costs. And then we do have several workforce accelerator programs that are funded and really led by the state. That's all under the brand name of Future 48. That's Arizona specific. Arizona is the 48th state in the nation, so that's why you'll see a lot of 48 branding around Arizona. And then Foreign Trade Zone, which is a federal program. However, there are local, state specific benefits of being in a foreign trade zone, specifically to the real and personal property. So that's what also makes it attractive to attract more of these export oriented businesses. Businesses that are building things here and exporting it out to other markets is an attractive thing for Arizona to attract. So the FTZ program is what we use to help further that. And I'll touch on, not to go these line by line, but this is just an example of our statutory incentive programs at the state level. There was a comment in the slides before about designing the clawback provisions to protect the taxpayer and help to induce more demand. The way it works in Arizona is all of our incentives are post performance, meaning that the company has to or actually create the jobs and make the investments before they receive any incentive from the state. So this qualified facility program is probably our most attractive program. That's a refundable tax credit, meaning it'll take the client, the company's Arizona income tax liability down to zero. And then the remainder, if they have anything left over, they actually get a check from the Department of Revenue. That is equivalent for either 10% of the capital investment or $30,000 per job for these billion-dollar projects. If it's not this mega project, that number goes down from 10% of the capital investment or $20,000 per new job to Arizona. It is the lesser of the two. There are very specific provisions in terms of the types of jobs that are created, the wage level for those jobs. They're all designed in a way to make sure that we can also protect the Arizona taxpayer. That we're not giving incentive that's too far out in terms of outperforming their public benefit that we're receiving from them. We have a quality jobs tax credit, which is industry agnostic. That's kind of right down the middle of the fairway, just a $9,000 per job tax credit. There's depending on the capital investment of the project, there's different wage levels. So the higher the capex, the lower the wages you'll have to pay. And kind of the baseline starts at the county median wage, and then maybe for both of these programs, the wages are adjusted annually. So as we are hopefully growing our economy and attracting more higher paying jobs here, and as our median wage goes up as a state, which it has over the last 10 years, these incentive programs will also change slightly, and it'll be tied to the wages, mostly at the county levels, how those are defined. There are benefits of being in rural locations. So if you're in some of these underserved areas, these qualifications go down slightly to try to help make sure that the rural areas have their fair shot at winning these projects. But let me pause there. I'm happy to answer any questions that may be in the chat. But I guess maybe just in closing, incentives are a key part of the process. But we know that companies are making the decision, and incentives should be one of the decision-making criteria. But a great incentive is not going to make a bad site become good. There's a lot of other factors, including workforce, utility access, being in a market where they can grow and thrive, in the community. So just wanted to note that it's definitely an important part of the conversation, but there's other factors that go into it. So let me pause there, and I'm happy to answer any additional questions.
Fantastic. Thank you, Thomas. All right, some compelling presentations, and let's just dive in. First question for Tim, and I'll just say another advertisement. If you do have questions, please drop into the Q&A function there. For me, it's at the bottom of the screen here. Tim, it's interesting hearing factors underlying trends of good or weak ratio of benefits to incentives. Can you further draw trends correlating to state or county government effectiveness?
I'm not quite sure what the question means by state and county effectiveness. Obviously, if you do a better job of delivering public services as a reasonable cost, then it might not cost you as much to expand services to whoever. I also think, no one's claiming that, I do think a key issue, look, I'm a big fan of customized job training. I'm a fan of infrastructure investments. No one is claiming that a customized job training program that is poorly run will be attractive to companies and will create jobs. So, the devil's in the details. Does your local community college or other job training provider, are they actually able to do an effective job at delivering that service? So, one of the challenges of switching the mix away from tax incentives and a little bit more towards these services, you have to make sure the services actually are delivered efficiently. So that's very important.
Thank you, Tim. Thomas, here's one for you. What has surprised you, if anything, about and I'm sure there were things, but about the LG Energy Solution project in Queen Creek?
The, I mean, the good news for us is because we had this streak of working, and this is probably true across the U.S. There was a lot of mega projects that were poking around, and again from Arizona's lens, there was a lot of semiconductor and battery. So a lot of the things that I think would have tripped us up, like going through this is Arizona specific, like our state land process. We had some experience, so that was great. But what surprised us was there was, and it was a small group, a very vocal group. There was community pushback to this project, and in our mind, this was a slam dunk right down the middle of the fairway. Like, hey, a multinational manufacturing project that's coming here. Now, they made this announcement in 2022, 2023, and I think all the economic development professionals here, every conference we go to, there's probably going to be some component of the NIMBY movement, not in my backyard movement, that is way more common now. But that was one of the first ones that kind of was interesting to us because it's not like it was right next to a school or right next to an existing area. It was out in the middle of desert that the state of Arizona owned. Nothing was out there. They were really the first mover. So in sense, on one hand, like what a great opportunity to get this project in here to bring all this infrastructure to induce all these other economic development benefits. But yeah, there's people that didn't like that. So that was interesting. We had to pivot and it ultimately went through and there was no disruptions to the project because of that. But it's always good.
Tim, back to you. With another question, does your finding that projects in distressed communities yield higher benefits hold for sub-regional geographies? In other words, if a project is located in a distressed city or neighborhood in a region that is not distressed, could economic developers still expect these outsized benefits?
Well, the distinction I would make is neighborhoods are not labor markets. They're not local labor markets. I mean, even in low-income neighborhoods, the overwhelming majority of jobs in the neighborhood are not held by neighborhood residents, and the overwhelming majority of residents in the neighborhood don't work in the neighborhood. So plopping jobs down in the neighborhood is not the most effective way of helping people in distressed neighborhoods. Now, when you talk about sub-regional geographies, okay, so usually we think about local labor markets as being metro areas, but it probably is true that it makes some difference. Like in the Detroit metro area, having jobs in Wayne County probably has somewhat greater benefits than having jobs in Oakland County. And for those who don't know Michigan, Wayne County is where Detroit is. Oakland County is a relatively prosperous suburban county. But plopping jobs down in a low-income neighborhood does not necessarily have higher benefits. Now, what does have higher benefits, if you can figure out how to connect people in that neighborhood with the jobs you are creating throughout the metro area, that should be your goal. How do we have programs either in job training or transportation or childcare that can enable people who live in a relatively low-income neighborhood to access some of the job creation opportunities you're doing throughout the metro area?
Thank you. Thomas, this next one's for you. Tell us a bit more about the role of these foreign trade zones. I'd be interested in hearing about how Arizona uses a national program to differentiate itself at state level. Is this about export competitiveness? Is this about other factors?
And I'll apologize in advance if I get kicked out. I think my internet must have dropped or something, so apologies in advance if you see me leave a screen. But yeah, that the FTZ, I think it's a uniquely Arizona benefit. I think other states have something similar. So and really just the rules that were established, decades ago was trying to find a new property tax class for these larger scale projects, and the theory being that everyone maybe will pay similar property tax rates, but if you're a manufacturer that has hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars of equipment in your facility and you're paying a similar rate as to somebody else obviously that value that you're going to be spending is way higher because of the value of the equipment in your facilities. So that was the kind of method to the madness. Is okay, let's if we want to help induce and attract these export-oriented companies, which do have a direct benefit to your market. You know, if you're going to try to attract these global companies that if maybe there's a downturn to the U.S., but if they're selling to other countries, that makes our market more resilient, makes our market less receptive to kind of some of these national recessions. Then how can we find a way to still be fair, but to give those folks maybe this added benefit. And that's the very, very short answer of like how, okay, if you're in an FTZ, you have the ability to kind of reduce your property tax at the real and personal property level. That all is subject to local approval. So, obviously the schools and jurisdictions all have their say, but that's kind of the method to the madness of why we use that program.
Thank you. Yeah, there's all kinds of tools and resources out there if you only go looking for them from the company perspective. Well, Tim, here's one I think you'll like. I'd love to hear more about a few specific examples of projects we can look to, specific lessons learned. If a state wants a model, who or what projects should it look at?
Well, I think I try to indicate the types of models. I mean, I don't know if I, would identify some specific state that I want to highlight as definitely doing everything right in incentives or definitely doing everything wrong in incentives. I will say that most states have trouble doing targeting. It's very difficult to do. And I don't know if any state stands out there. North Carolina has pretty aggressively pursued targeting in the past, but not completely successfully. I think that some states do much more in customized job training. I was happy to see Thomas talk about some of the things Arizona does, but I know that Michigan does a lot in customized job training, traditionally, so do the Carolinas. And I think that's something to emphasize. In terms of how incentives are structured, I like states that have budget for incentives, like California does with California Competes, where you have a budget and you recognize that resources are limited. And yes, incentives can work, but we need to put a budget on them. And I also like some things that, Thomas mentioned, trying to make sure you don't pay incentives except for delivery. Virginia has an incentive program under which you allocate incentives based on jobs created, and then you actually don't pay it till 4 years later if the jobs are still there. And I think that's an interesting model of committing incentives, but actually not paying until the jobs have lasted at least for 4 years. And I think that's an interesting model.
Well, we are nicely in the weeds, and that's a good thing for this kind of conversation. So we'll stay there. Thomas, so speaking of customized and nimble job training, can you tell us a bit more about the Future 48 Workforce Accelerator in Arizona and what sets that apart? And speaking for myself, I did appreciate you flagging why there's so much 48 branding in Arizona. I think I knew that, and then I forgot, and then you reminded me, so thank you.
State 48, that's something that we're proud of. So, in Future 48 was a model, or kind of, again, now the more statewide branding for this effort, but it really started with a program with Lucid Motors, which is down in Pinal County, just south of Maricopa County, the city of Casa Grande. And generally speaking, there's always a partnership of like a statewide function, usually some type of funding mechanism from the state, a higher education provider, mostly community college, but I think universities and others can support that as well, and then industry, and kind of getting those three entities together around one shared physical space to have customized training for a specific industry. So it started with Lucid to say, hey, we need to get a lot of technicians that work here. What we don't have in Arizona that maybe you'll have definitely in the Midwest and the Southeast is folks that have probably worked in an automotive plant before. We just don't have a lot of that industry. So what we were struggling with, or what we needed to have a solution for, is like, how do you get people to have maybe some manufacturing skill sets and get them trained to this new to Arizona industry. So that was actually, under the branding of Drive 48. So this Future 48, there was a program specifically designed, again, with a community college, probably 10 miles away from where LG is building their new facility. The state was heavily involved. LG themselves are also heavily involved to solve that exact same, use case. Okay, we don't have a ton of, or really any large scale battery manufacturers here yet, but we have a lot of other skill sets that are here. People that work in the aerospace industry, people that work maybe in non-manufacturing roles where there's some transferable skills. Let's get them in the door. Let's find a way to have this, hands-on training that we can build that workforce for the future. So it takes a partnership. It takes a lot of people to say, hey, how can we help? And it also takes the state to kind of have that long-term vision. So it's kudos all around, and it's been working out really, really well. And selfishly for me, as the economic developer trying to sell our state, kind of sell our region, it's a great tool to have in our toolbox to pitch to clients.
Well, one of the benefits of tackling a topic that is literally ripped from the headlines is there's not a shortage of questions for you guys. So over to you, Tim. How do or might project level community benefit agreements, known as CBAs, relate and support the outcomes and benefit distribution? Did any of the projects on this list have a CBA, or did that come up in the scan? And then taking a step back, what are some of the types of programs that you found most interesting when looking at these 50 projects? So we heard about the Future 48 program in Arizona, about FTZs. What others interested you and your team?
Well, I think some of these projects did have community benefit agreements, but I don't off the top of my head remember which ones. Community benefit agreements, I've been part of a lot of discussion of community benefit agreements. They work the best for areas that have more projects and they know what to do with. And then they can be a very tough bargainer and say, we're only going to consider you if you agree to do the following things if you locate here. I've often been struck by it's the Nashvilles of the world that are interested in this, or the San Franciscos of the world, or San Diego, whatever, and not so much the Flint, Michigans of the world or some distressed rural area. And the reason is they're not as strong a bargaining position. Now, I don't think that means you can't do anything to increase community benefits. So, for example, if you want to encourage more local hiring as a way to increase benefits, one way to do that is to use a stick. You say, okay, in order for you to locate here, you're required to do so much local hiring, or you're required to jump through various hoops to demonstrate you're at least considering local hires. That's a stick approach. You can get away with that if you're willing to forego some projects. On the other hand, you can also go to companies and say, as a carrot, we have this great customized job training program that's been award winning and does a tremendous job, and we can help recruit in ways that you could not do on your own. Different workers, and we have these tremendous job trainers who will do training for you for free, and that's a carrot. And that is not a community benefit agreement because companies can take it or leave it, but it can affect who they hire and thereby increase benefits per capita.
All right, still getting questions here, but I think we can squeeze in, I'm going to try and squeeze in two more. Thomas, how does GPEC or the state determine whether companies would truly require these incentives to remain in or move to the state? Or are all expanding companies eligible for the tax incentives you described? Curious to hear your thoughts on the challenge of offering incentives to companies who may not need them.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I appreciate the question. The way that it works in Arizona is that there's definitely a sentiment to try to shy away from the perception that the state or just the broader economic development community is picking winners and losers. Maybe to ask that question in a different way is, people maybe ask us, well, how come we can't get the same incentive offer that TSMC or LG did? And the way our programs are designed, which I think are designed on purpose and designed well, is the whoever is applying for the incentive actually does not matter. It's all based on the economic impacts that you're providing. So you could be a brand new startup and you will get the same offer as if Google or whatever the most valuable company that you can think of, Apple, comes to our market and has the same project. So it's all based on merit. It's all based on the economic impacts that you're providing to the community. Now, whether a company does or does not deserve the incentive is not something that really economic development opines on. It's really like, hey, what's the benefits that we are going to receive if you are going to be investing millions or sometimes billions of dollars? Obviously, that's an upfront cost that these companies are putting in. So if we can compete against other states, maybe we can help offset some of those costs, but still protect the Arizona taxpayer.
Thank you. All right, Tim, I think this is the last question we're going to have time for. No pressure. The 50 projects your team studied represent only a small share of announced investment in energy technology, manufacturing, and deployment in the U.S. Your team was able to evaluate the Queen Creek project. Your team was able to evaluate several projects in Georgia, many in the Southeast, but information isn't always publicly available for these projects. Can you talk to us about transparency and its importance?
Well, it's really important. And by the way, I should acknowledge that this was like a team effort. There's like 10 authors on this paper, not just me. And there was no way. I did not do this on my own. I did this with the help of many other people at the Upjohn Institute. And the big thing we had to do was research these incentives. And I will say we still have a pretty big problem with transparency of incentives at the state and local level. There has been progress. States have dashboards now, et cetera. Some local areas have a lot of information and analysis. We actually had a lot of information, for example, on projects in Nevada. But many other cases, you have to go through some county commission meeting or some school board meeting and look at the minutes or something or other. There's not a lot of transparency here. And I think that is actually really crucial that for state legislators, for example, to evaluate these programs, they need, ideally, we would know this for each state in the country. What are the incentives being provided for each project? When are they being provided? How is it, et cetera. We had to do a tremendous amount of research by different staff people, researchers at the Upjohn Institute to really look into this. And as I said, we had 100 clean energy projects, only 50 could we really find adequate incentive information. And there were a bunch of interesting projects. We just said, look, we just cannot find the relevant information. We can't evaluate them. So it's a really key thing, and it's a good issue to discuss. How do we improve this?
Well, to be transparent here, Tim, I want to thank you and Thomas both for taking the time to join for, I think, an engaging discussion, good presentations, lots of questions. I'm really sorry that we didn't have time to answer all of them. I think if you're on LinkedIn, the algorithm will send you to Tim and the Upjohn Institute today and RMI because there's that report out. Thomas, I know you're also on LinkedIn. People can find you there. I want to say thanks to Ben Feshbach and Marco Solomon for really putting this together and making this happen. Yes, there is, Tim, as you say, some magic behind the scenes, but it's actually not magic. It takes real people, and it's all a team. So thanks to ours here. Please don't forget about our upcoming in-person boot camp for economic developers in Boulder on July 30th. Reach out to me. Another webinar from RMI's economic development team in July. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.